History is full of brilliant minds meticulously designing the ultimate weapons of war in secret. High-tech underground bunkers. Right, think again. Well, not exactly. Sometimes. The deadliest military technologies in human history were born from absolute, spectacular, and often hilarious scientific screw-ups. Welcome to the chaotic world of accidental inventions, where looking for a way to live forever might just blow up right in your face. Let's travel back to 9th century China during the mighty Tang dynasty. It was an era of deep philosophy, incredible art, and questionable chemistry. Emperors back then were absolutely obsessed with finding the elixir of immortality. They hired the smartest alchemists to brew potions for eternal life. These ancient scientists mixed everything they could find, from gold to mercury. Spoiler alert, drinking mercury does not make you immortal at all. But one particular group of alchemists decided to get creative. They mixed saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal together, hoping for a magical health tonic. Instead of glowing with magical life energy, they noticed the dark mixture started to violently spark, smoke, and get dangerously hot. And then, boom, the lab went up in smoke. They had accidentally invented gunpowder, which is pretty much the exact opposite of life. In a stroke of pure historical irony, the alchemists actually named this highly explosive concoction, Huo Yao, which literally translates to fire medicine. This so-called medicine burned down their wooden houses, scorched their eyebrows completely off, and definitely did not cure anyone's chronic back pain. At first, the Chinese didn't even use this dangerous powder for war. They thought it was just a really cool way to scare away evil spirits. They packed the powder tightly into bamboo tubes and threw them into roaring fires to create the world's very first loud, colorful fireworks. It was a beautiful, festive, and completely peaceful accident. But human nature being what it is, peace never lasts too long. It didn't take long for someone to look at those fireworks and think, what if we pointed these exploding tubes at our enemies? And just like that, the fire lance was born. It was basically a sturdy bamboo tube packed with gunpowder and tied tightly to a regular spear. It functioned essentially like a primitive, medieval flamethrower. It spewed a horrific mixture of fire, toxic smoke, and sometimes sharp pottery shards directly at the enemy. It wasn't exactly a high-precision weapon, but the sheer, deafening noise and blinding fire were more than enough to completely terrify enemy horses and break troop formations. Innovation didn't stop there. Soon, Chinese engineers were mass-producing gunpowder bombs, launching early rockets, and even burying primitive landmines to defend their walled cities. But you simply cannot keep a military secret this loud forever, especially not when the rapidly expanding Mongol Empire comes aggressively knocking on your city gates. The Mongols eventually conquered China, absorbed the gunpowder engineers into their ranks, and swiftly spread the explosive technology across the entire Eurasian continent during their conquests. As the explosive powder traveled steadily west along the famous Silk Road, military engineers realized that simple bamboo tubes were no longer strong enough for bigger blasts. To harness more power, they began casting massive tubes out of solid bronze and iron. Now, instead of just spraying fire, the explosion could forcefully push a heavy projectile. The cannon had officially arrived on the battlefield, and its sheer destructive power completely shattered the established rules of medieval warfare, both literally and figuratively. For centuries, massive, intricately built stone castles were considered the ultimate defense. A lord could simply lock the heavy wooden gates and comfortably wait out any besieging army. But now, a battery of well-placed cannons could turn a magnificent, incredibly expensive, and supposedly impenetrable fortress into a pile of smoking rubble in just a few short hours. Even the elite knights, heavily clad in incredibly expensive suits of custom steel armor, suddenly found themselves entirely obsolete against a poorly trained peasant holding an early musket. It is deeply ironic that an accidental medical experiment, originally intended to extend human life indefinitely, had single-handedly become the most terrifyingly efficient way to end it. However, the accidental discovery of gunpowder isn't the only time a massive, paradigm-shifting military technology happened completely by mistake while scientists were looking for something else. Let's fast forward a few centuries to the tense atmosphere of the 1930s. The world is on the brink of war, and the British government is desperately asking for a death ray. Yes, you heard that right, an actual, sci-fi-style death ray. The British Air Ministry offered a massive cash prize to anyone who could build one. The looming threat of enemy bombers dropping explosives on London had everyone in a state of absolute sweating panic. They needed a miracle defense. Enter Robert Watson Watt, a brilliant Scottish meteorologist who was just peacefully trying to use radio waves to track thunderstorms. The military asked him, "Can you build a machine that cooks a pilot alive in midair using concentrated radio energy?" Watson Watt did the math. And the math unequivocally said, no. You would need an impossible amount of power to even slightly warm up a pilot. But while calculating the exact reasons why a death ray was a stupid idea, he stumbled upon a much more practical phenomenon. He realized that while radio waves definitely couldn't melt an airplane, they were incredibly good at bouncing right off the metal fuselage. If you send out a radio pulse and time exactly how long it takes for the echo to bounce back, you can calculate the exact distance of the object. It was essentially echolocation, exactly like how bats navigate in the dark, but using invisible electromagnetic waves instead of sound. Watson Watt rushed back to the military. "I can't give you a death ray," he said, "but I can give you something infinitely better. I can give you magic eyes that can see enemy bombers through solid clouds, pitch darkness, and thick fog, from hundreds of miles away." The British military was skeptical but desperate. They funded a secret test, using an old BBC radio transmitter to ping a flying bomber. And to their absolute shock, it worked flawlessly. The blip showed up clearly on a small green oscilloscope screen. Radar was officially born. The British immediately began constructing a massive, secret network of giant metal towers along their coastline, known as the Chain Home. This invisible radio shield would soon become the decisive factor in the most crucial air battle in human history. In 1940, the German Luftwaffe launched a massive aerial campaign to bomb Britain into submission. They heavily outnumbered the Royal Air Force. Normally, defending against airplanes was a guessing game. You had to keep your planes constantly in the air, wasting fuel and exhausting pilots. But thanks to Watson Watt's accidental radar, the British knew exactly when, where, and how many German bombers were coming, long before they reached the coast. While the enemy thought they had the element of surprise, radar operators were calmly tracking their every move over a nice cup of tea. Ground operators would instantly telephone the fighter bases, scrambling the iconic Spitfire and Hurricane fighter planes at the perfect, calculated moment. They would vector the fighters to intercept the bombers with deadly precision. It was essentially like playing a military video game with a map hack. The Germans were completely baffled. Every time they tried a sneak attack from the clouds, British fighters were magically already up there, waiting for them. Without this accidental invention, the Royal Air Force would have been quickly crushed, and the entire outcome of World War II could have been drastically different. So, a failed attempt to invent a ridiculous sci-fi death ray ended up creating a defensive shield that saved the free world. But radar wasn't the only time a massive wartime lifesaver was discovered entirely by accident. Sometimes, the hero isn't a scientist, it's a lack of hygiene. Let's step away from the loud battlefields and enter a very quiet, but extremely messy biology laboratory in London. In the year 1928, meet Alexander Fleming, a brilliant Scottish researcher studying bacteria. He was undeniably smart, but he was also incredibly disorganized. His desk was a nightmare. Before going away on a month-long summer vacation, Fleming completely forgot to clean up his workspace. He left a bunch of dirty Petri dishes stacked up. It was the kind of horrifying mess that would make a health inspector instantly pass out. Seriously, it was a biological disaster zone. When Fleming finally returned, he found his bacteria cultures ruined. They were covered in a gross, fuzzy, blue-green mold that had casually blown in through an open window. Most scientists would have just thrown the ruined dish into the trash and cursed their own laziness. But Fleming noticed something bizarre. Right around the gross blob of mold, there was a perfectly clear ring. The mold wasn't just sitting there, it was actively releasing a chemical juice that was completely dissolving the deadly Staphylococcus bacteria. He had accidentally discovered penicillin, the world's very first true antibiotic, a microscopic weapon against infection. But here is the crazy part. Fleming couldn't figure out how to mass produce it. So, he just wrote a paper and gave up. For over a decade, this miraculous discovery just sat gathering dust on a library shelf, completely ignored by the world. It wasn't until World War II broke out that scientists Howard Florey and Ernst Chain dusted off Fleming's old research. On the battlefield, Bullets and shrapnel were dangerous. But the real silent killer was the bacteria hiding in the mud. A tiny scratch from a dirty piece of metal could quickly become a lethal infection that no doctor could cure. Flory and Chain managed to purify the mold juice and began secretly brewing it in whatever containers they could find. They even used hospital bedpans and old milk bottles to grow the mold, creating a makeshift underground medicine factory. When they finally tested it on wounded soldiers, the results were practically magic. Dying men were recovering in just days. The Allies quickly launched a massive industrial effort to brew millions of doses of penicillin just in time for D-Day. This accidental mold saved millions of soldiers who would have otherwise perished from simple infections, changing medicine forever. So remember, the next time your mom yells at you for not cleaning your room, tell her you're just doing vital medical research. While scientists in London were accidentally growing life-saving mold, chemists in America were busy trying to make things easier to shoot. In 1942, during World War II, the Allied forces urgently needed clear, durable plastics to manufacture precision gun sights for their weapons. They tasked a brilliant chemist named Harry Coover to experiment with a specific group of chemicals called cyanoacrylates. Coover and his team mixed up a batch, hoping it would easily mold into a perfectly transparent, hard plastic lens. But instead of a nice, solid piece of plastic, they ended up with a ridiculously frustrating, insanely sticky nightmare of a liquid. This chemical goop stuck to absolutely everything. It stuck to their glass test tubes. It stuck to their desks. And it definitely stuck to their fingers. It was completely useless for aiming weapons. Annoyed by the mess, Coover rejected the formula, threw the sticky experiment away, and moved on. Fast forward 9 whole years. It's 1951, and Coover is working on a different military project, trying to make heat-resistant canopies for jet fighter cockpits. Once again, he tests those cursed cyanoacrylates. And once again, they ruined his equipment by permanently gluing 2 expensive glass prisms together. But this time, Coover had an epiphany. He realized he hadn't failed at making a plastic, he had accidentally created the world's strongest adhesive. He immediately patented the formula, and soon after, superglue hit the commercial shelves, permanently sticking household items and clumsy fingers together everywhere. But the military story of this sticky accident didn't end there. In the thick, humid jungles of the Vietnam War, superglue found its true calling. Combat medics were completely overwhelmed by severe injuries in extreme, chaotic conditions, where applying traditional bandages was too slow. They discovered that spraying a customized version of Coover's superglue directly onto a severe wound could instantly seal it shut. This quick-drying liquid bandage saved countless soldiers from critical blood loss before they could be evacuated to a hospital by helicopter. So, a sticky chemical failure became a medical miracle. But our final accidental invention brings us back to the hero of the Battle of Britain, radar. By 1945, the war was finally ending, and technology companies were trying to figure out what to do with all this highly advanced radar equipment. Enter Percy Spencer, an American engineer working for Raytheon. He was a brilliant, self-taught genius who was heavily involved in building magnetrons. A magnetron is essentially the beating heart of a radar system. It's a heavy metal vacuum tube that generates powerful, invisible electromagnetic waves. One day, Spencer was standing right in front of a fully active, high-powered magnetron, running some routine equipment tests. Suddenly, he noticed something very strange happening in his pocket. It wasn't a sudden burst of radiation sickness, it was getting gooey. Spencer reached into his lab coat and pulled out a peanut cluster candy bar that he was saving for later. It had completely melted into a warm, sloppy mess. Most people would have just been annoyed that their snack was ruined and gone to wash their hands. But Spencer was a curious engineer. He immediately realized the invisible microwaves from the radar equipment had somehow targeted and rapidly heated the water and fat molecules inside the chocolate. To aggressively prove his crazy theory, he immediately sent his assistant to go buy a bag of raw popcorn kernels. He placed the dry kernels directly in front of the active magnetron tube. Within seconds, they violently popped, flying all over the pristine laboratory. The world's very first microwave popcorn was officially born from military radar technology. It was an absolutely delicious scientific breakthrough. Next, he tried an egg. The rapid internal heating caused the egg to violently explode right in his assistant's face. Science definitely requires sacrifice. Spencer had successfully harnessed the power of military radar to cook food at impossible speeds. He quickly patented the radarange in 1945. These massive, refrigerator-sized early microwaves weren't for regular homes. They were immediately bought by the military to feed massive crews on commercial ships and submarines. It took decades of engineering to shrink that massive, heavy military hardware down into the cheap, convenient box sitting in your kitchen today. Every time you lazily heat up yesterday's pizza, you are literally using the exact same technology that helped win the Battle of Britain. And that perfectly summarizes the bizarre, unpredictable, and deeply ironic relationship between science, human progress, and the brutal reality of warfare. We search for eternal life, and we accidentally invent a powder that burns down empires and shatters heavily fortified castles. We try to build a ridiculous sci-fi death ray, but end up creating an invisible radar shield that saves entire nations from destruction. A lazy biologist forgets to clean his desk, and accidentally produces a microscopic weapon that saves millions of soldiers from invisible killers. A frustrated chemist gets his fingers glued together, completely unaware that his sticky mistake will one day seal combat wounds in the jungle. And a melted candy bar in a high-tech radar lab eventually revolutionizes how the entire modern world cooks its late-night snacks. History isn't always written by flawless geniuses in sterile laboratories perfectly executing their master plans from step A to step B. Often, history is written by clumsy people making terrible messes, breaking their expensive equipment, and having the sheer curiosity to ask, wait, what just happened? So, the next time you make a spectacular mistake, don't be too hard on yourself. Just take a step back and look closely. You might have just accidentally invented the next world-changing technology. Just try not to blow up your house in the process. Seriously, leave the highly explosive chemistry to the professionals. Or at least wear proper safety goggles. If you enjoyed this chaotic journey through historical accidents, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. What is your favorite accidental invention in history? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.